Sorry, I'd like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting will be held on Wednesday, March 11th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. Welcome everybody. I hope everyone had a very restful and relaxing break. As you can see, and I think you all received, we have an official budget that will be handed over to the Board of Finance, so I look forward to our conversations with them, and then on to the RTM. I think they will be distributed ASAP to the rest of the group. With that, I will, because we have a full schedule tonight, I will move on to public comment this evening. Is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to Superintendent's report. Dr. Adley.
Good evening, everybody. It's nice to see you. And welcome back to our families and our students. I trust everyone had a relaxing and enjoyable break. I want to thank Dr. Silva. Just before the break, it seemed that we were just at this meeting. At least it seems that way, right? With the break in between. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you to Dr. Silva for putting together on St. Valentine's Day a lovely, diverse day of professional learning. I think it's the full last day that she's put together, so thank you, Susie. Much appreciated. Congratulations to a number of students. Last night there was a big class of NHS students, and it was wonderful to see the best and brightest students in the district being celebrated for their scholarship and character and service in the community. So wonderful to see so many kids being recognised. There was a number of children recognised for the Music for Youth 2020 contest for our music and our jazz theme. If you want to see their work, it will be up on in the high school auditorium on April 13th performance. And if anybody has ever seen the big Birdland big band, have you ever seen those? Everybody go to Birdland in New York? Anyway, that's where they play. But they're coming to.
It's a jazz club. It's good.
It's a jazz club. Yeah. It's very good. Sort of to round out the jazz experience theme for the year, which is pretty unique. I have to say, like to have a jazz theme right up and down the district. We actually talked about this today in the district. From K to 12 is very, very unique, and these types of enrichment opportunities that are supported, I might say, also from our parents. So thank you for that. I think, understandably, you would understand that we had to cancel the trip to China. That's unfortunate, but we have about 12 students who are planning on attending, and we thank the parents for their understanding. And the staff is doing their best to supplement those experiences with other ones. I don't know that they'll be totally similar, but obviously if you don't go, you don't go. But we thank them for working with just a tough situation. We have some 5th and 6th grade parents who are sort of over at the middle school tonight, probably getting worried about their transition and learning a little bit about that, so we wish them well. We are in the process of winding down the search for the Royal Elementary School principal, and we anticipate hopefully being able to announce something at the next meeting. Strategic Planning Committee has been meeting. We had a meeting this morning. I want to welcome in the corner there, Dr. Richard Lemons. Dr. Lemons is on the agenda this evening, but he's spent a good bit of time in the district. He will also be here next Wednesday conducting various focus groups for staff, parents, and students. The Oxford Building Committee has met, the Design Committee has met, and the Security Committee has met since the last time we were here. Luke is here as the principal. We look forward to the SLAM presentation a little bit later this evening, because that will give the board an opportunity to see real life, the actual building come to life a little bit and understand where we are in the process. I do want to say that I mentioned the last time about the Access Cost Cooperative that was sort of tentatively being rolled out at the legislature. This thing is getting traction, so much so that I do believe that we really need to be proactive about this. The bill there's no bill on the floor at the moment, but really what's being proposed is the legislator is potentially going to act on a new formula, not knowing what the formula is and pass it on to a Board of Governors to actually enact that formula, so they will have the legislative power to do that. But what we do know is that there's a strong component on ability to pay. So districts like ourselves are potentially going to be making up the deficit of access costs for the state and actually for some other districts. So I do think it's time to get our legislators involved and so on, because we need to be ready to go when this hits the floor, because it seems to be gaining momentum. And board members have received their budget books, and that concludes my announcements.
Dr. Riley, can you just gather any information you have and distribute to the board
Sure.
so that we can decide the best way to discuss with our legislators? Thank you. With board committee reports. Mrs. Ritchie.
I'll just, sorry about that. Just briefly, the Finance Committee met yesterday, February 24th, with all members present. We discussed several things, the January results, as well as 3 transfers that we'll be looking to approve this evening. We also touched upon a possible future transfer if the board decides to accelerate the transportation consultant.
Thank you. Any other board committee? I'm not sure anyone else reported. With that, we will move on to presentations and discussions. I'm going to ask for an amendment to the agenda. Oh, I'm sorry. There's only one approval of minutes tomorrow. Back up. It's exciting stuff, everybody. It is requested that the board approve the following minutes. Minutes of the regular meeting held on February 11th, 2020. May I have a motion to approve? Mr. Maroney, seconded by Mr. Deneen. All in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. And I'd like a motion to amend the agenda because SLAM is still over at P&Z doing good work. So I'd like to move item A, Oxford Building Committee presentation, down until, they don't think they'll be here now, 8:45?
They're scheduled until 8:30, so then probably 8:40, 8:45.
All right, so let's move them just we'll move everything and we'll put them after our discussion on transportation. Okay?
So moving item 7A to be after item
7E, yes. May I have a motion and a second to the motion? Mrs. Stein, all in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you, everybody. So with that, we will move right into the an update on the Strategic Planning Steering Committee and Dr. Richard Lemons. Welcome, Dr. Lemons. Please come on up.
As many of you know, actually everybody knows that Dr. Lemons is Executive Director of the Connecticut Center for School Change, and he is facilitating the board's work on strategic planning.
Richard, do you want the podium mic, or we can get you another mic if you want to sit at the table?
Or you want this one? Whatever works. I'm not going to talk. Okay. Disappointed. Does that give you enough sound? Does that work?
Yep, that works.
Good evening. It is delightful to be here this evening. We started kind of early this morning, so we've been at it for a while, and a few of you are sitting around the table have been going at it all day. I come tonight basically to provide an overview of efforts of the steering committee over the last couple of months. We've been hard at work over 4 meetings trying to deliver on the charge that you've provided to the steering committee. If you notice on this slide, this is the visual that the superintendent provided weeks and weeks ago around what this might look like in terms of process, in terms of a timeline. We worked back in the late fall, early winter, trying to work through what this might look like. Came and we did a call at one point in the fall. Then I came and did a presentation here, and we walked through this at that time. You helped create the steering committee, which is representative of parents, students, educators of different roles and responsibilities. And then we are in the midst of the third ray, I guess is what you would call this, conducting the needs assessments. We have been in the midst of trying to take stock of Darien Public Schools, what are its assets, what are its areas of development, and with the idea that that will then allow us to move forward into the creation of some key artifacts that will ground the strategic plan, mission, vision, core values, that it will line up with the work that's going on in the high school and the creation of a portrait of the graduate statement, and then it ultimately will inform the creation of improvement strategies and goals for the district for 5+ years down the road. And I thought that the best way to efficiently provide an overview was to share with you artifacts from the work. So I'm going to share a number of slides, and each of these slides has either been a tool or it's the result of some of the work that we've done. And I'll walk you through this, and then I have some questions that I'd like to engage you with at the end of the presentation, and obviously I'll answer any and all questions that you have. So I'm going to click through that. We have this hyper animated. I'm just going to walk through all the animations. This is a conceptualization of how the needs assessment that we're in the process of developing will ultimately lead to development of goals and some foundational documents. If you start in the upper left-hand quadrant, the steering committee was asked to conduct a SWOT analysis in the very first meeting that they were in the room of Darien Public Schools. It wasn't informed by hard data and evidence. It was informed by experience and people's perceptions of the district, kind of walking in cold. They weren't even told they were going to be doing this analysis. And that helped us identify key themes and patterns, big issues that seemed of particular importance to the people on the steering committee. And if you look down below in the bottom left-hand quadrant, you'll see a list of some of the most prevalent themes that emerged in that SWOT analysis. People wanted to talk about what does it mean to have success for students in Darien Public Schools, and do we have a balanced picture of success? Are we so focused on achievement in the classic old ways, SAT scores, access to college, or do we have a balanced kind of look at how people are developing as human beings and the degree to which they're healthy? Then we had, there was some concern about whether we're retaining the top talented educators who come to Darien Public Schools. I think there was an initial sense in that SWOT analysis that Darien brings amazing people to the district, and there was a question of, are we holding on to the amazing people once they come? There were a number of questions around teaching and learning, and there were several under the category of teaching and learning that were very much focused on meeting the needs of special needs students, from students who have IEPs to students who might need acceleration in terms of gifted and talented programming, but just in general, do we have a coherent instructional program? There were questions around culture. What's the culture of our buildings, and then also how does that fit in the culture of expectations, norms, mores of the broader community? There were questions about, do we have defined systems for Darien Public Schools? Do we have an infrastructure that supports sustainability and making good decisions and supporting the work as we go forward? And then there were questions about technology and facilities, and we ended up kind of grouping those together into a broader category. So we've been using this set of clusters, we've been calling them, as a way of anchoring the identification of questions that we wanted to answer, as well as sources of evidence that might help us answer those in order to conduct a needs assessment. So if you go back to the top and you move to the right out of the initial SWOT analysis, we asked each group, we put people in small groups representing each of those cluster areas, and we asked them to identify the most essential questions that they thought that they needed to answer for the needs assessment. So for example, in teaching and learning, what were the most important questions in relation to teaching and learning that we should answer, and what are the sources of evidence we should draw upon? And the idea, and this was really coming from the steering group, is they wanted it to be evidence-based. They wanted it to be a kind of disciplined set of findings about Darien Public Schools. We've been in the midst of that for a couple of meetings. We had quite a bit of work that was done this morning, in fact, on trying to distill down what does all this information tell us. It was the people who are out here and the people who are around, if you look at tired eyes, it was hard work. I think people were exhausted when they left at 10:30, and I can only imagine that they're exhausted now at 7:30 in the evening. We're hoping to get maybe in the next meeting to where we've almost, or we have entirely finished the needs assessment. We've identified the basic patterns and trends of what Darien Public Schools is like right now, and then that becomes a foundation for the work ahead in finalizing a strategic plan. It'll help us prioritize the work going forward. It'll help us inform creation of mission, vision, and core value statements, and ultimately it'll help us prioritize to goal areas moving forward. So that's a visual of how this work is supposed to come together. One thing that I will point out is it's not those areas in the bottom left-hand quadrant. It's not that we assume that those will become categories of the strategic plan. They were a device coming out of the initial SWOT analysis of these were the issues that were of most importance to people, kind of predominantly, and that we're using those as a way of organizing the thinking and the work, at least for now. But once we've done the full needs assessment, we'll look at all of the information because the findings bleed across area. For example, findings around teaching and learning might very well relate to findings around technology and how technologies are being used in the classroom. And that might connect quite powerfully to what's our vision of an educated child in Darien Public School. So we imagine at the end that these findings are broader, more conceptual, help us think about the work going forward, and then we'll challenge the steering group to help us organize the priorities going forward into the future. So here are some artifacts from the first few meetings. One of the things that we did the very first meeting we were together is we tried to reach some agreement on how we would operate. As a group, we didn't spend an entire day or two norming ourselves, but we did think it was important to create some ground rules. I brought in some proposals of norms that I've seen work with other strategic planning groups, and the group was very thoughtful. They kind of considered those, took the majority of them, amended a few others, and then added some others. We ultimately came to this collection. We start every meeting putting those up just to remind ourselves that there's a bigger picture at play that we're trying to pull off, and we need to hold up our ends of the bargain in order to get there. We call them working agreements because they could be adjusted at any time. They're not sacred and untouchable. They could be adjusted as we learn how to work better together. That first meeting, we also asked people in the room to respond first in writing, in some quick brainstorming around what it was that they wanted for Darien Public School students. And then after every individual had the opportunity to think and reflect and write, we then brought in some technology and asked them to pull up their phones and to text their answers. And in real time, we populated this Wordle, which captures a lot of the thinking in the room. And then we debriefed this for 20 minutes. And it was amazing what conversation came out of this. If I can think back to a couple of months ago, you know, I see that. We made you work too hard. I saw you. I saw that yawn over there. I'm not going to take it personally. That a number of people were struck by the kind of wholeness that was expressed in some of these words. There were a lot of words about care and support and experience. And I think people were happy about that. They wanted some idea of what we're up to here in Darien Public Schools being about a bigger picture for students, one that might help them be successful after they leave us, but also one that doesn't just create hyper stress and about solely having a 4.89 GPA and a 1600 SAT. We then did, and we mentioned this earlier, we did the SWOT analysis. And I used this because it is such a simple and straightforward and intuitive device, and 80% of the people in the room had been a part of a process of conducting a SWOT analysis. But if you've not been a part of this, it is basically you ask groups to identify areas of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. The strengths and weaknesses are asking you to look inward The opportunities and threats are asking you to look beyond yourselves, both in terms of space, but also in time. Is there something coming down the pike that's going to change how we think about Darien Public School? Is there something happening in the policy environment that we have to pay attention to? Is there something happening with enrollments going up or something like that? So we did that. We broke people into small groups. We filled up charts, we debriefed those charts, but then at the end of every meeting, basically, I've walked away with a lot of homework. And my team back at the Connecticut Center for School Change, we consolidated all the thinking and then brought back the results of that SWOT analysis, which included the raw notes, but it also included those clusters that we identified earlier. And here were kind of the first cut of some of the clusters, but with some of the sub-bullets underneath. I'm not going to go into great depth because this is an early rendition of this from weeks ago, and the thinking has definitely evolved quite a bit all the way through this morning till 10:30. Once in that following meeting, when we brought back that information, we asked people to self-select into one of the clusters that they felt most connected to. And people walked to those groups, and we asked them to identify questions that were critical to answer in a needs assessment for that cluster area, be it technology and facilities, or be it teaching and learning, or be it a well-rounded vision of success, and then identify evidence and data. And this was the template we created for them, and so this just had a sample example, not from Darien, but just from another place, and what it might look like to answer that question. And we walked away with a whole bunch of questions and quite a number of sources of information that people wanted. And in reality, and it took us weeks to consolidate and pull together those sources of information, in fact, because people wanted quite a bit, and that was great, but some sources of information didn't exist. But sometimes we had other information that helped to inform that question. So we brought all of that together. We then, the conversation of a portrait of graduate had come up in our second meeting, and we kind of flew past it too quickly. We gave a quick overview. We talked about what the high school was doing. I mentioned it because the Connecticut Center for School Change works with a number of districts who are trying to create portraits of the graduate and are trying to strategically realign their system to be about that portrait of the graduate. And at the end of that meeting, people said, this idea seems too important to just skirt past, and can we spend some time in the next meeting? So the next time we came together, we talked about what is a portrait of the graduate, why is this movement happening across the state and across the United States around the development of portraits of the graduate, or sometimes called visions of the graduate, what's happening at the high school right now as they develop one, and how will it feed into the strategic plan, and how will the strategic plan feed into and speak to the portrait of the graduate. So here was just a part of my quick overview to them, and we brought in artifacts. We showed people a number of portraits of the graduate that have been developed across the state, and a couple from across the nation that are seen kind of as templates that a number of people refer to and look at. Also talked to folks in that just about, I've seen a whole number of high schools and districts create portraits of the graduate that end up just being sheets of paper with a variety of nice words on them, but they don't ever have an impact on the system. And I would say those are the places that do those portraits of the graduate poorly, and when it goes well, what's happening. We talked a bit about that. And then we also invited the steering committee to review strategic plans from different districts. And our purpose of doing this, before we got too far down the process, was to get in everyone's mind what a strategic plan could in fact look like, because they often look very different from one another. The strategic plans of Farmington and Simsbury and Fairfax County Public Schools, which were some of the examples that we brought into the room, look very different. They privilege certain kinds of information, they structure the information in different ways, and they have they have types of information that are very different in scope and in depth. So we drilled into multiple examples and asked the steering group to identify what they liked in different plans. So we now have a collection of attributes and ideas that we think that by the end we'll come back to and circle around that might inform to create a more powerful strategic plan, both in terms of how we structure it and how we present the ideas. Oops, let me go back a little bit. Well, we can leave this here. I'm not, it looks like I'm advertising for the campus service. So all of this rolled into a pretty intensive 3 hours this morning. We met at 7:30. The major part of that session was asking small groups who were responsible for one of those cluster areas to look at available evidence from inside the district where it existed and external research on best practice in that area where it existed, and to draw some conclusions. And obviously we were not going to be in a place when we were getting this presentation for you so that it could be available to you as part of your board pack. We were not going to be representative of this morning's conversation, but I can tell you there were a number of things that struck me in this morning's conversation. Then I would invite the board members who are part of the process to add to this, and the administrators who are around the table to add their perspectives. One theme that emerged to me across many of the groups was a want for coherence, consistency, and clarity. There was a sense that we do many things well, but maybe there's a lot of variation across the system. Elementary school might do it one way, schools do it different ways. Is it okay that they do it different ways? Shouldn't we have greater clarity around that? And that showed up in a number of the places. I think that there was, I think that there's a strong core in the group that want to make sure that what comes out of the strategic plan honors the great work of Darien Public Schools and its long track record of success, but also invites in new forms of celebrating success, a more well-rounded, balanced vision of what a graduate could look like and what success looks like as an achieving student in Darien. I think that emerged quite powerfully. I think we have some more work to do in the teaching and learning area. We're really big and powerful conversations around how do we differentiate and meet the needs of all students coherently across the system. I think is the real question we're trying to wrestle with, and I don't think we've gotten to the end of that conversation. In terms of next steps, we know that in an upcoming board meeting, the superintendent's presenting findings from his entry plan. And we are looking to that entry plan as a source of evidence that we're also going to use in identifying patterns and trends. So we're treating this first part that we worked on today as kind of draft patterns and trends of our needs assessment. We are going to seek out some additional data. Some of those data are going to be gathered next Wednesday through focus groups. With educators, students, and maybe parents. We can pull it off in that day. Yeah. And it looks like that's been confirmed with the parents, and with the entry plan. And we're hoping that that meeting that we have, which is just a half a week after you presenting to the board, we will be able to transition out of the entry planning process, or the needs assessment process, and start to move towards the creation of these kind of seminal structural artifacts that will anchor the strategic plan, and then another phase which will move us into what do we prioritize going into future years, what are the broad goal areas, and then how do we engage educators in identifying the specific strategies for pursuing that work. So I am, as the person who's facilitating the process, I'm probably the least apt person to give you some kind of testimonial of what it's actually like to go through it, but I have some of those victims around the table. So I was wondering if we might be able to invite some of the board members and administrators around the table to comment on the process over the last 4 meetings and 8 weeks.
I'll start. I've never done a strategic plan before, but the part of it that I find most enlightening and informative, and also sort of backs up some of my beliefs, is the diversity in the room, and particularly for me, having the high school students there. We have 2 high school students, and they are incredibly outspoken, they're bright, and they have a lot to share, and I think everybody is listening to them, and to me their input is so valuable, and I was so struck by their ability to relate with all of us in that setting. So that's my 2 cents.
Anybody else? Mrs. McCann?
Sure. I think that I think it's exciting to have a bunch of people in the room. I think one of the things that I look forward to most is to hearing next from the focus groups, because I do agree that student voice is really critical. And I look forward to hearing from, I know that the people in the room are really committed to education and love it and committed to the public schools, and I look forward to hearing from a few people who might have a different profile and hear what they have to say. I certainly think that one of the things that's interesting is that it's, that sort of set of core buckets that we started with. There's nothing shocking about those buckets, but it's really nice to have them identified.
Anyone on this side of the room?
Sure, I'll add to it. I think what's interesting about the process and important for the Board of Education or public to know is that the process isn't quite linear and it's not really clean. It's very messy. Each time we're together, we're asking more questions. Things don't necessarily always make sense. So questions result in more questions, and I anticipate they'll continue to do so. So I think when we look at the end product, whenever that is, I'll have to look at it online, I think it'll be interesting for the public to realize that this wasn't just clean. It takes, and people that are in the audience who are participating as well know that the process, the thinking process that's happening is just as critical as the overall product.
Yeah, and we have members in the audience who actually are part of that process also, and I'm just excited about the actual excitement and anticipation that it's engendered, and I appreciate your leadership of it and everybody's participation. And there's a lot to be said about not even the outcome, but the process itself. And we're all eagerly, I can tell you we've got the right person to take us to the promised land, and I promise you that, because we're all eagerly looking forward to how the final jigsaw puzzle comes together.
I would just reinforce the power of the people in the room. You put a great collection of people who clearly care quite a bit about this community and the school district and the students in the room together to do this. And tease the superintendent, when we were planning just this morning's session, he was saying, well, I don't know if we're really going to be able to sustain their energy all the way to 10:30. And that's a long stretch of time. People still have commitments that they have to go in the day. And then there was a big chunk of the time that was going to be almost an hour and a half or more of just working in groups, reviewing this material and trying to talk through what does this mean? And he was questioning. I don't know if they'll be able to sustain this work, and it was painful trying to bring people out.
I promise you I had higher expectations.
No, I think it was just it is compelling how seriously people are taking it and how much energy they're bringing into the room.
Well, and I would add on to what Susie said. Today was slightly frustrating for some groups, because you didn't have all the, it isn't linear and you don't have everything at your fingertip. And so that part of the process is really interesting, sitting around with a group of people you don't know and you haven't worked with before. So, I think we on the steering committee or whatever we're called are learning a lot too, right, about ourselves. And I think it's...
Didn't realize it was going to be therapy.
No, I was like, yeah, today was a little frustrating at times, but in a good way.
So what should the board look to receive?
Great question. So shortly, I would say shortly after the superintendent's entry plan presentation, we will be finalizing a needs assessment that I will put together on behalf of the group. So there'll be these patterns and trends that we've started to formulate, but we still have more questions we want to have answered, and we imagine that the focus groups from next week are going to help fill in some gaps. We assume that the entry plan will help fill in some gaps, and there might be some other sources of information. But we'll pull that together, and I can come back with that and give you a sense of what the steering group believes it's found. And then shortly after that, we will be working with them, and then, if you remember the original planning, and with you, to reach some conclusions on what your mission statement, your vision statement, and your core values would be. So very soon we're going to be figuring out a way to not just bring back that finally cooked, because I don't think that would work if we come in and say, well, we figured this out, just vote on it and accept it. We've got to we have to figure out a way to do a dance where I'm engaging the steering committee, but I'm also engaging you at the same time, and we're having a conversation. And so I would welcome ideas of how to do that. It works differently in different districts on how to pull that off. But I think the creation, before going to strategies and beginning to prioritize the strategic work for the next 5 to 10 years, being very clear about what your vision is for the district, and being very clear about what your core business is, and being clear about who you want to be and how you want to operate with each other in your community, your core values. Those will be critical documents. So I think we want to have you all in, and whatever we reach, we want to make sure that it represents your good thinking.
So just, here we go, Mrs. Best. Just because, you know, I've had the pleasure of kind of stopping in and see how the groups work, and there's a great free flow of information, and we work very highly stylized, right, and in public. So I think at some point the board's going to need some homework or some information to be able to really sift through so that they can have an informed discussion in this type of setting, and one that's meaningful rather than receiving it and trying to react to it in real time. Like, I think we're just going to need some of the meat, and I see the good work going on. And since we just work set up differently as a public entity, I think we're going to need a little bit of reading material.
Mm-hmm. So as to that end, I think that makes quite a bit of sense. On the needs assessment piece, I think that when that is developed by the group, it won't be that we're assuming it's done and that we captured it. You, in fact, hold a bird's eye perspective about the district that most of the members in the room don't have access to. And so there might be blind spots in our needs assessment, and part of our charge to you will be, what did we miss, if anything? And are there other areas of assets and areas of development that we need you to identify for us? And then we can figure out also a way to engage you proactively and not reactively as we begin to develop the documents.
That's great. Mr. Burke?
Thank you for the presentation. Following up on our chair's point, and one of the terms you used that struck me was your use of the word evidence. I'd be curious, whatever your work product comes up, to have whatever that evidence is described or categorized. Is it focus group? Is it testimonial? Is it documentary? Whatever those founding evidentiary matters are, I'd be interested to hear.
Will do. We will make sure that it's documented and easy to reference.
Mr. Cini?
The clusters that you got.
Yes.
The clusters that you guys identified, I mean, it's a long list. Is there anything glaringly unique about them, or are we missing anything, or is the steering committee missing anything based on what you've seen from other districts?
I don't, there's nothing entirely surprising. Typically in every single community I've worked with, teaching and learning takes up a big part of the strategic plan. People are thinking about what is the work going forward. In some ways, there maybe has been even less attention in Darien to that. There's as much attention on the others as being equal areas of investigation. And even the conversation on teaching and learning has gotten a little narrow at times, not in a bad way, just in a different way than it tends to go in other districts. I think that one piece of conversation that's coming up in many communities and many very different kinds of communities in Connecticut right now is equity and diversity. And it came up for the steering committee, I think, early on, but I think it will be really important for us to wrestle with to what degree does it show up in the strategic plan going forward. And I say that agnostically. I say that as your outside facilitator who gets to drive away at the end of the day. It just strikes me that this is a conversation that many communities are having. Who is this community for? What does it mean that everyone in the system feels appreciated and welcome in the community and has access to all the good stuff that everyone else has access to? And maybe that's coming up more. I think that would have been in many of our urban districts 10 years ago, but many of the suburban districts wouldn't have been talking about equity deliberately. But the last 3 or 4 years, it's surprising to and heartening to us at the center of how many communities are thinking about equity, and they're thinking about equity in very different new ways.
Mr. Deneen.
Thank you very much for the update, and thank you everyone for the incredible amount of work that's being put into it. Just a question, portrait of a graduate, and I love what Mrs. Stein said about the impact of what the students have brought to the table. So when you talk about portrait of the graduate, is there anything where you're going out to our graduates and getting information from them to add to kind of the evidence and the data?
That's a great question. So quite honestly, I don't even know yet. I know that that your high school principal is working to develop a plan of the various people who are touching and influencing this. There's a heavy emphasis on students being a part. We've heard her talk about how important it is to have student voice. And maybe Superintendent, you have a sense of whether we're going out to recent and former graduates. I know that there's also some want to bring in the community, and I'm sure some of these community members are former graduates, but I'm not sure whether recent graduates.
So I don't have a sense of that for Wednesday. I have had a sense of being in meetings where our kids have actually come back as parents. I think at the high school particularly there, they come back and have panels, and they do a great job of that. So I would take that under consideration. If it would be possible to pull it off, yes. I don't know where all the children are. Young adults are probably off of college or other places, but maybe not exclusively so. But certainly gaining that insight is very, very valuable.
And we're working to tighten up that plan and make sure that it aligns with the steering committee. So we'll take this suggestion back.
Any other comments or questions? Mrs. McAdam.
Dovetailing on the points made about the process and about what the board should expect to see, I would love when you come back to the board to see a specific set of what the board is going to receive at approximately what point in time and what expectation you have of the board at that time. So that we can see, this is very helpful, but I think there's a level of detail underneath this that it would be nice. And I'd love to hear from you sort of what you recommend. Perhaps we might adjust it if necessary, but it would be helpful to have a starting point from you.
So I think that the superintendent and I can work through your calendar and work through the plan that we have for the steering committee and line those up and be able to put in front of you a plan for that.
I have a feeling it might take a special meeting or two.
Because of me?
No, just as you work through our calendar.
I know it's early in the process, but the one thing that kind of struck me is kind of on the clusters of in-district issues, kind of the bottom, ensuring facilities and technology to support our educational program. We've had a lot of conversation around technology in education as we've gone through the budget process. iPads, yes, iPads, no. Are they used? Are they not used? How are they used instructionally? How are they not used instructionally? And everything around Chromebooks too. So, I mean, to me, I would have almost envisioned seeing that as a top-line bullet, technology and education. And maybe it will get there, but just kind of a comment as I kind of look through the issues. I think facilities stands by its own for the most part, but that just struck me in terms of where technology fell in that slide.
And it very much still could show up at the top. It could be that at the end of the needs assessment, it emerges as something that the steering committee and you tell us we ought to prioritize in the work going forward.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dr. Lemons. Thank
My
you to all
pleasure.
the members of the steering committee are here. We look forward to moving this forward.
Thank you.
I feel better.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We will now move on
I know, I'll have to wipe it down.
to an update on the kindergarten enrollment for 2021. We'll give Dr. De Silva a minute. We're all disinfecting these things.
Okay, so as you know, just about at this time of the year, every year, we begin the registration process at our schools, which is done now digitally through March Science efforts last school year. And as you also know, these numbers do fluctuate. So right now, as of Valentine's Day, this is what our kindergarten registration numbers look like. And this actually means that these are the children that are fully enrolled, fully registered in our digital warehouse. So that's the registration for this school year. And then just below, I included the registration numbers for last school year so you can have a comparison. There's some subtle increases and some subtle decreases. And the number of sections that were budgeted for are in the last column alongside our class size ranges. There's nothing really earth-shattering at this point in the year, but it does transition into March and April where we make decisions about how many sections we'll need.
Any questions? This is our first blush. Get used to seeing this. It comes back a lot. Any questions?
No, so right now we're basically okay.
We basically don't know, but it looks like we're okay. So if we saw 100 kids at Henley, we'd say, well, what happened there? We are looking at increasing our efforts to have our families register. So that's where I would ask for those individuals who know people that are enrolling the children that don't already have their children in the school district. We really encourage those families to register early and fully register because we don't actually add them to this list until all of their paperwork is complete. And so as you know, through the budget process, there was a lot of talk around enrollment and sections and why didn't we get another section? And obviously it's not the same for grades 1 and up, but for kindergarten, we do have some control over that. So I would encourage your friends or anyone that you know that's moving into town to enroll their children as soon as possible fully. For those that have completed the paperwork halfway, the most accurate representation can be if they complete everything from soup to nuts and reach out to their school principal if they have any trouble. Dr. Forshaw, do you want to
just going to say, schools are eager to help troubleshoot
yes.
because it's the first time parents are doing this entire digital registration. So if parents want to reach out or have to come on in, do a tutorial, sit with some folks and get some help in getting it out.
I think that's important to know that it's digital this year. I'm not sure the board knows that.
It was digital last year?
So we shared it out last year. This was one of Marge's goals in supporting us to get to this process where our families are registering. They can still come in to the schools and register with the schools, but everything gets uploaded digitally. And so really you can't really see a difference, right, from the digital to last year. But we've been considering some other things such as yard signs and perhaps even the newspaper just reminding families. Again, it's the families that we can't access. We do send letters out to the area preschools and ask them how many of their children are kindergarten age and how many of the children are not coming to school for kindergarten and are staying in their area preschools. So we do reach out, we send out reminders. We offer, as you know, many, many sessions for incoming kindergarten families. Register now.
I'll just second Dr. De Silva's plug and being a parent who registered at the very last second for her child.
Me too.
But I do know often when we have this conversation, once we set sections, those sections are set. And we try to hold as late as we can, but then often if we have a big registration all of a sudden in August, and then people want to know why you have class size variation or why do you have an optimal or why do you have a range, it's because we are doing our best. So the earlier you can register, the better we can set sections, the best teachers we can go out and hire if we need them. So.
And we are talking about kindergarten, but even those families that move into town that don't register right away, because obviously they know we we take all children, regardless of when they come. There isn't a no, you can't come type of thing, or there's no classroom for you. But the sooner you can do that, the better we are.
So don't be like me. Register early.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
So social media might be something you want to explore. There is a Darien Moms Facebook page, and I've seen a lot of moms that are saying, I'm coming to Darien, or I have a kindergartner, or next year I'll have a kindergartner. So that might be, I don't know how you can access it.
Well, so they probably won't let me in, but I can ask some of my Darien moms.
It's a closed group.
Maybe they can send you the registration form.
We know people.
But it seems to be a lot of incoming families and younger moms are using that to access information. So that might be a good way somehow, CDSP, to let people know that they can do it digitally and they should do it sooner
Talk about
rather than later.
responsibilities and getting out information. But social media is a good way to do
Well,
that.
just there are a lot. I
Sure,
see a lot
yes,
of them
for
on there.
sure. So as much as possible, I can tweet something out. I have a number of followers, but again, I think the challenge is sometimes that even it's the folks that are within the district, they know because they're accessing all of our information. It's the families that aren't part of our district yet, that are moving into town and don't necessarily know when registration is, and just we're a little bit slow to the hit submit on the button. So.
Okay, can I ask a quick question?
Yep.
Is the progression in terms of 2019, 2020, that was the first digital year?
No, actually, this year is our first
Oh.
full digital year. So,
Okay, so
yeah,
you
so
don't
it's
see
really
any
not,
trend.
we're not seeing a difference.
But if you go before 2019, 2020, did you see the similar progression from each registration period, like 10%
no,
increase?
so they definitely vary. In fact, I had the 2018, because when I pulled the 2019 up from that document, I had the 2018 from the prior year. So there were definitely some pitches, and there were some outliers, and there tend to be. And we actually might see that, Mr. Cini, across March and April, where all of a sudden you'll see, let's say, homes go from 42 to 72, right? Because that's probably the one that's the biggest difference here. So you might see that happen. You'll see a spike here or there, but the numbers were actually a little bit different in 2018.
They all go up, though, I'm assuming, right?
They all end up exactly where they need to be, at least. But they do, we've had surprises. This was one of those years, obviously, this past year, that we had some surprises, but we do get there.
Great. Thank you. We'll look forward to updates on that.
You got it.
We'll move forward to the discussion on the January 2020 financial report and possible action on proposed budget transfers. Mr. Rudel.
Sorry, Rich, I know. You taught me today.
So this is the financial report through January. We are currently showing a year-end positive forecast of $351,866, or 0.35% of the budget. The general education RCs currently forecast a surplus of $544,790, with the special education RCs forecasting a negative $192,923. The financial report is broken out into 4 categories, the first being salaries. Salaries are forecasted at a positive $577,000, broken out between salary savings of about $254,000, column change of about $57,000. Budget control remains untouched at $263,000, and then we have a small surplus in student interns for $2,400. The operating section is currently a deficit of just over $92,000. There are some transfers to cover some of these items, including the consultant services, which is the portable and library study that was approved by the board at a previous meeting. Special education consulting services at $84,000. We are forecasting a small negative variance in special ed legal fees right now of about $20,000. We have the transfer for the board's consideration for professional development for special education at $15,000, and then we have small positive surpluses in special education transportation, and then tuition, both public and private schools. In fixed, we are showing a surplus of just over $70,000. It is primarily driven by utilities. We are seeing a positive variance in our heating expense, primarily at Darien High School and Middlesex, with the conversion to natural gas. Plus, we have had a warmer winter than expected, so that's generated some additional savings, and we continue to track that as the year progresses. And then revenue, we are forecasting a negative variance of $204,000. This is primarily driven by excess costs being anticipated to be less than received by compared to budget by about $207,000. We are anticipating that to be just over $2.6 million. We are basing the forecast on what the estimated revenue is by the State Department of Education. We do have another filing due March 1st, and we are hopeful that we might be able to adjust this up by about $40,000, but we won't know until May. So for a conservative basis, we are assuming the estimated revenue as of December. So the three transfers for consideration, the first one is for $27,500. This is to fund the portable and library architectural study that was approved by the board at a previous meeting. $15,000 for special education professional development. This includes professional development for psychologists and then co-teaching. And then $84,469 for special education consulting services.
Any board questions? I know much of this was discussed in depth at the Finance Committee meeting. Any follow-up?
I did have one follow-up question from Jill, and just to qualify what the PD for the psychologist was. It's a DBT training, yes.
Any other questions? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve the transfers as outlined in the financial report presented by Mr. Rudel, the January 2020. Mr. Burke, a second. Mr. Mulroney, all in favor? Maroney, sorry. Maybe even more Irish. All in favor? And that passes unanimously. Thank you.
I just wanted to make sure that nobody had any questions on any of the other information, because he did provide some information on the grants. So everybody's good on everything else that was in the packet? Okay.
We will move on to the discussion on transportation. Dr. Adley.
Yes. 22 years ago, when I first entered the town of Granby, right, the first police officer I met was Jerry Maron's father, and a nicer gentleman and police chief you couldn't imagine. You're a credit to him, and he's a credit to you.
Well, why don't we invite Captain Maron up to the table if you'd like? Yeah,
Are we
come
going
on
to
up.
merge these two items?
I feel like, well, now that he's sitting in the audience,
So-
we might as well bring him on up here.
Come on up.
To the board, I did receive, and I want to thank Chief Anderson and the captain for their assistance. I don't know if the board needs additional copies. You received it electronically. If you'd like a hard copy, you certainly have one here.
Ms. Maroney, Mr. Dean. You all received this, I think, earlier today.
So-
Why don't we take consideration for the consultancy first?
Oh,
and
okay, I'll
then-
do that.
So you'll just sit with us for a minute. You're okay. So the board requested a look at moving up the consultant. And so, Dr. Adley, I don't
Sure.
know if you have thoughts on that. I know some
I
information.
do.
Okay.
So we do have information on. Richard and I had a discussion about what the actual consultant would do, what the charge is, and some of the things that the board is actually looking to do also. So there's a scope and sequence of the work. Perhaps it's not completely inclusive of everything, but we've tried to cover the basis of what we can capture it. If I can use this opportunity just to clarify sort of my best recommendation to the board, if you don't mind, because this is probably the opportunity to do that. So if we have a consultant that's going to take us several months to actually bring it to the table, perhaps even in June, right? Potentially, the board I think would want to look at this in a 360 inclusive manner, as would I, as would the administration, right? So I'm guessing that the board would also like to consider potentially even changing the distances that children have to walk. Potentially. Potentially, that can range from anywhere from a couple of $100,000 to $1 million. I just don't know that that's a process we want to fast track and be it stuck in June with anywhere from $500,000 to $1 million potentially of where we go now. I just don't think that that's a position, the best position for the board to be in. my honest appraisal of this, and I would ask the board to give sort of like contemplation of this, if you would, right? I think it's a good idea, and the board suggested it. Can we not do both simultaneously? With a consideration of doing that. Okay, so I think that's a good plan. But to be done in a thoughtful and timely manner, perhaps in time for the budget next year, I would still suggest, based on, and I don't want to steal the captain's thunder here, but based on this report, which I would capture as not having any known safety defects to say that in any way that it's unsafe for pedestrians. That's my summary after talking to the chief. The captain can speak to that. I would go back to what I said the last time we were here. Allow the superintendent to exercise what is in the actual policy itself, to have an exclusion for that particular area. I've said it's safe, but I've also said it's not ideal. We know that the construction next year is going to potentially last through at least through the start of the fall. There's no guarantees that it's not going to make the situation any better. We know that, right? So I just think that the best thing for the board in general to get to where we want to go is put that in board. Put that bus in place. Let the exception stand for the year. I'm not talking about this year. I'm thinking that the thing that is going to contribute to this is the actual construction that's going to take place. So there would be a bus to allow to capture those children in that area, and let that bus be in place for the year, and let the process play out this year in a thoughtful way in time. I just be honest with you, I don't think we should go to the Board of Finance for, like, I don't even know what the number would be, right? But let's just say anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million, and I don't think we should do that. I don't think we need to do that. I think we could do it in a thoughtful. We may have to put it in our budget for next year. Well, that's a decision the board can make collectively. I just think it's responsive. It's a reasonable approach to what we've heard and what we've been and how we may respond to that. It's based on safety, but it's based on safety for next year, and it gives us a thoughtful way. Because I'm going to tell you, with everything else that we're lifting, there's only so much we're going to be able to do well. I'm just being honest. That on top of the actual process of the actual consultant, him or herself. So what would that mean? Well, the budget's been done. I would not ask the board to go back and open up the budget. There's $25,000 in there for a consultant. That would contribute towards part of the bus. Where do I get the rest of it? I honestly don't know. At this point, I don't know the answer to that. If the worst came to the worst, next year, worst came to the worst, I would have to freeze some things to pay for it. That's the worst scenario. But even this year in the budget, things opened up for different strange reasons and logistic and real reasons, and they may open up again and give us a wee window to do some things. But I would still ask the board to reconsider that position, because I think we're putting ourselves in a position we don't need to be in, and we can address this reasonably in a more measured, thoughtful way.
Board questions? Mrs. McCammon.
So thank you for your perspective, Dr. Adley. I think part of my question to you is that I think that there are multiple ways to look at the situation today and into the future. I think we have an overall question about our busing. I think there's a question of construction, which was opened up, and there's a question of Noroton Avenue, which is fairly specific. I think if we want to go down the road of construction, we need to have a conversation about construction and what that means, which we haven't quite done. If we want to just make sure that the policy language allows for a bus on Noroton Avenue, that's open to us as well. You know, we could add, for example, some language about on-ramps and off-ramps to the highway, and that would, you know, necessitate a bus to Noroton Avenue, up Noroton Avenue. You know, because if we don't want children walking past them, for example, I'm not saying we do that, but I think it's a possibility. So all that to say, you know, I think we want to be careful about how we have a conversation about each of these components. I also, specifically thinking about the study, I do think it's complex and it's worth taking the time. I don't necessarily think we need to wait. We might think of doing it in a tiered way. You know, it might be that there's some preliminary work that gets done that kind of informs maybe a policy decision preliminarily, and then some additional work that gets done going forward. I just think I open that up as another possible way to think about this. I do agree with you. It's something that needs careful work and study, and I don't think that we should rush anything. That said, I think it's work that we're committed to doing. So I think it's, you know, I look forward to hearing what the board members have to say, but I think it's an important process.
Where do you have an opinion where you want us to land? Or how, does anyone have an opinion on how you want to approach this? Because there's two issues that I heard that people wanted on the agenda, which was the consideration of moving up the consultant. Yes. And then we were kind of waiting for the police report, which we now have to inform. Mm-hmm. And then I do hear what Dr. Adley's saying. He has a standing exception as a superintendent he's made. Mm-hmm. The board, in some ways, I think maybe unintentionally, put up a roadblock to that exception by denying the money. And so I'm glad to hear you think that maybe there's still a way to do that, should the board feel they need to. But so I think we have all three of those issues. So I think we can talk about the consultant. I think we have the police here as requested if there's a question specifically about that corridor. And then I also think we do need to, as a board, grapple with that quagmire we kind of put ourselves in. So I would say there are all those three components that we need to take a look at. Mrs. Stein.
And can we also frame that in what Rich provided at the meeting yesterday, which is the actual real timeline? So as much as we want to accelerate things, the reality of the timeline, and if I heard you correctly, Rich, you know, if I'm incorrect, please correct me. The top consultant may not be able to start till May or June. That's 3 or 4 months. And then there's also the time constraint of actually securing buses can take 8 to 9 months. So I think my perspective hasn't changed from my vote on, you know, allowing the superintendent to use his purview and put that extra bus in right now while we're concurrently doing the study. The timing of the study, it sounds like, may align perfectly with our budget cycle next year, given when we get results. I don't agree with Mrs. McCammon in terms of maybe doing part of a study. Maybe you need to clarify for me, but I don't want to pull out parts of a study before it's done to inform policy or other things. I would want a robust look at 360 review done on our busing before I make any judgments on policy or anything else.
Mr. Denis.
And I guess to the point about procuring a bus is, are we within the right timeline that you can procure a bus for the next school year? And does that process have to start now, or do you give them a heads up that, hey, we're potentially going to add a bus to the route next year?
Well, I guess when do we actually go out to bid for the service?
So if we were to add a bus, we'd likely have to add a used bus. A new bus would take probably 6 to 8 months to get, because it actually has to get manufactured at a plant. And it's a lengthy process to get. We would look to secure or borrow a bus maybe from the surrounding district. The hope would probably be about 3 to 4 weeks to get that.
So wait, I just want to be clear when we're talking about add a bus. We're talking about adding a bus for next, as I understand your recommendation.
Yes,
a bus for next year, not
yes.
immediately.
Right.
Yes.
And we have time then.
Is that
you could get a bus within 3 to 4 weeks.
A used bus, correct.
And then just to follow up, when do we go to bid for next year's
so
busing
next school
contract?
year is year 3 of 5. For the
Okay, so we're already in the contract right now, so we would be asking to add an additional bus to our current contract.
Mr. Denis.
And I assume that when you say used bus, people's ears peak up, but that used bus would be in the standards of what we laid out in the contract for what we want for a bus.
So all the buses have to be inspected and maintained.
Right. Okay.
So it's not like a clunker of a bus, but
right.
They do have to be.
So in line with what you laid out here from a transportation consultant, which I think is a good framework, and the conversation around having a 360 view, I think the problem is, as a board, we've heard a lot, we've gotten a lot of information. I don't think we've talked about, and I think maybe even tonight's the night to talk about, does this cover everything we want to cover from a consultant standpoint? Like, I wrote some notes down here, like, to me, and I think it helps educate the community broadly, and will help us as we look to reevaluate the policy. But there's stuff here that I want to understand. Crossing guards. Where are they put? Why are they put there? What are the costs associated with them? Will they come back with recommendations for more crossing guards? Is there anything that a transportation consultant does with respect to infrastructure around sidewalks? Do we have the right sidewalks in the right place? Do we have the right ADA sidewalks in the right place? Annual striping. The weather up here, the amount of traffic, is striping the way it should be? Is it reflective? We've got kids walking to school in the dark. Again, the other broader topic that I know has come up, buses. Is there a feasibility for us to own our own buses? If it's really not possible, we should just state that, and we should state why. It doesn't make any sense, even if it's just because we have no place to park them and the cost is exorbitant, and then we take on the service and the maintenance. But I think if we're going to move forward, and I think it needs to be 360, we have to make sure we cover the minutia, so to speak, because I think it's time to do a transportation study, but I think we just have to make sure as a board we're covering all the pieces of it.
So I think, I think in terms of what we have the authority to do, certainly we could look at our transportation. I have OPC tomorrow. I can bring up with Mrs. Stevenson some of these questions, because sidewalks, crossing guards, striping, that's all going to fall within the town domain. And I know there's been some conversation, should the school pay for crossing guards or the town? And we can do that, but quite frankly, it all comes from the taxpayers. So I think the taxpayers just want to know it's happening and happening the right way. I'm not sure the town independently would appreciate us going out having a transportation consultant tell them where to put their sidewalks. So I think that would have to be a joint conversation, and we can see if they're interested in having that conversation with us. But we have, I'd say, a town infrastructure question, which is part of what you're identifying, Mr. Deneen, and then we have a busing situation. And I think we have to know where those lines are and then agree where we want to have the conversation if those lines cross. That's my opinion.
I would just add to that, at OPC, I don't know when it would be appropriate, but there's two things. The pedestrian infrastructure survey that was, or study that was completed 5 years ago, what progress has the town made on that? And are there still areas of improvement that would in fact impact our students, because we need to give them safe passage? The other thing I would be interested in talking to the town more about is, rather than owning our buses, is there a place to park buses? Because we know that we would be able to enter into a more competitive bidding process and potentially have other busing companies open to that process if we are able to house the buses here in Darien. And I have thoughts about where that could possibly be, but I'd like to hear from the town. I'd like the town to be open to have discussions on whether or not we can potentially put the buses somewhere.
So again, I think part of that is the conversations, much like we just had with Richard and the strategic plan, kind of how we want to see this all work. I think what we are on now is, are we accelerating the consultant? Are we waiting till next budget cycle? And then I think the right consultant, part of that interview process, is what are we looking at? Mrs. McCammon and then Mr. Burke?
I do think before we go into a decision, the board needs to flesh some things out. I recognize we may want to make a decision tonight, but I'd like to give us some time to.
We're not on for action.
Yeah, okay. I think adding to kind of the point of what we talked to town about, I think that there might be some opportunities to ask about if there are any trends or best practices that we could be thinking about, whether that's electric buses, the use of hubs, whether it's, any other forms of transportation like micro-transportation. I think there's some new trends and things happening in public transportation that might be able to inform what we do. We don't necessarily have to do the same thing we've always been doing. So I think, kind of on the subject of just what we're talking about here in the study, I think I would like to advise that we talk to a consultant, but we also find out sort of what's going on in transportation, maybe beyond the borders of schools.
Well, the time has certainly allowed the collaboration to take place and the thoughtfulness to take place.
Great. Mr. Burke?
Thank you for the report. I don't have any particular questions about it. I will tell you, I'm not surprised. I think I could have predicted a month ago that we were going to get a report from our town saying that our roads and crosswalks and sidewalks are safe, because if they were unsafe, they would have addressed them without the necessity of a school board pointed it out. I think that we need to have this study. It needs to be comprehensive, because I think at the end of the day, we're going to really be talking about whether or not, for a population of students, whether or not it's advisable to have it be more convenient and less arduous to get to school, not as much a safety issue. Although I will say, I don't have any informed view of what the impact will be on the construction, and that's a big question. But I think that we need to get this study. I think we need to begin getting this information sooner than later. And I think we need to let our superintendent give him some flexibility to make these judgments with regard to busing next year.
Mr. Sini, did I see your hand?
Yeah, so first, I don't think the board put itself in a quagmire. I think at the time it was a last-minute request from the superintendent. I do believe that we've received information that we've been waiting for, which is impactful to that decision. So I just wanted to make that clear. In terms of the timing of the study, I think, in my mind, based on the administration workload, the sooner we can commence with it. That didn't mean to rush it through for next school year, but the sooner we can commence with the beginning of the study, that would be great. So if it happened versus May or June versus July or August, we're a couple months ahead of the game. So I think that was my intent in moving forward with the way the majority of this board went. So I think we still have two issues. It's hearing the proof that and getting some facts around this additional bus that was proposed but was not added to the budget. We still don't know the exact number of students we're talking, not exact, but broader numbers. And if you could talk about the bus route, maybe you have prepared that. Sure. I would like to just get an overview, because I'm reading a memo saying that this is a safe area, but I'm getting a little different kind of read from the superintendent and saying we still need a bus in this area. And it's mainly based around the construction timeline, if I understand it, but maybe we could.
So let me be clear what the superintendent is saying. I'm trying to be reasonable, right? I believe it to be, I said at this last meeting, I believe that area to be safe. But I'm also trying to be, I've also said it's not ideal, right? And it's an area that has, that a population of our community probably thinks the same or probably thinks worse, right? I'm just saying that I'm recognizing that there's going to be significant construction there next year that's behind schedule at the moment. So I don't want to put the board in another position where we're like, well, we could have taken care of it if you had taken care of it. And I'm trying to do be reasonable in the sense of, look, it's not going to get any better, right, during construction. So I just don't want that dynamic to come up. I'm just trying to alleviate that dynamic altogether. Maybe it's not necessary at the end of the day, but I don't know that. I just don't want to go through this again. I don't think we need to go through it again. I think we can reasonably, by putting the bus in place, try to address it. So my position on whether it's safe or not hasn't changed. I'm just trying to give the board and the community a reasonable way to address this and come out on the other end with a reasonable way to address the recommendations. And I do agree with you, if I may say so. The superintendent did bring this as a last-minute budget item, so you're correct in that.
No, it wasn't.
But you're being factual. Factual's correct. That's fine.
We're trying to gather the information around this additional bus.
Right.
So, and I think my point, to be clear, it's not that we didn't put the bus in the budget. We didn't put the funds for the bus in the budget, but the superintendent is recommending it under his authority. So he has the ability to come to us next year with transfer for a bus, and it sounds like he may. So I just want the board aware that that's where we are, and we have found creative ways to do things in this budget. I believe the superintendent, he will find creative ways, but we do have a standing recommendation. Our choice was not to put the funds in for that. So that's the only juxtaposition that I was saying we're at. We're hearing the recommendation, and we just need to know the funds are probably going to have to be pulled from somewhere else. Mr. Brown.
Thank you. Captain Marin, thank you for coming in. Thank you for sitting with us for the past 2 hours. We have your report, which we very much appreciate. Since you're here and we've kept you here all this time, do you have anything you'd like to add or contribute to this to inform us beyond the report?
First off, I'd like to thank you for having me. We appreciate that you consider us stakeholders in this process. And, you know, to hear all you speak about the different levels of concern you have and the different processes, it helps me understand how we might be able to better help you. You all have the report, which I don't think is startling by any stretch of the imagination or anything. There's no real surprises or anything dropping out of the ceiling, but I think we position the chief of police is similar to Dr. Adley. It's not ideal, that, you know, conditions in the area that we're talking about. However, there's nothing inherently unsafe about the area as well. You know, to back up a little bit, we were asked to watch the intersection of Rowan Avenue and West Ave for the potential of adding a crossing guard there. And for those of you who don't know, we have 8 crossing guards in town in various locations. And there's, you know, some require more of a need for a crossing guard than other spots. You know, the dynamics over the last several decades have contributed to that. Sorry, thank you. So it turns out, over the course of a month's time, we kind of took weather into consideration and the day, you know, the time of day, and we monitored the intersection for 8 sessions where, if you want to call it that, where we would say is going to be most high traffic areas of students coming and going towards the high school. And you know, most of the days it looked like there was no activity at all. I'm not saying that a month is a good cross section of time to properly reflect what that intersection would normally produce. But it was what we could do under the time constraint we had to kind of give you guys a quick turnaround on data. You know, for the benefit of the people who don't have the report here, there was our records division went back 3 years and pulled accident reports that occurred on Norotan Avenue in the area that we're talking about, and there were 3 that specifically involved a pedestrian of some sort. 2 of them were bicycle related. Both of those minor accidents were actually the fault of both the bicyclist and the motorist. And one other accident involved a pedestrian that was crossing by Norotan Avenue by the entrance to the highway there, by Post 53, where a car yielded to the pedestrian and the crosswalk and was subsequently rear-ended. So that was the data as far as accidents involving pedestrians was concerned over the last 3 years. And I would say that, and with the amount of cars that travel that area, that's kind of on the low end for what we normally see. The Post Road in town is obviously the highest traveled road that we have in the jurisdiction, and it would produce numbers a lot higher than that in similar type conditions. So I'm basically here if you have questions for me. The report kind of speaks for itself. And I apologize on behalf of Chief Anderson and Captain Bob Shredders, who's the liaison to the Legal Traffic Authority, but they had a variety of other meetings to be at tonight in town as well. So.
Well, in fairness, as part of this process, I never requested the police to actually be present. I only asked them yesterday, so.
Well, we had board members' requests, so thank you, Captain.
So I hope I accurately represent.
Yes, Mrs. Ritchie.
So based on this report, thank you very much for being here tonight and for taking the time to issue this report. So based on your findings, you don't see any need for any crossing guards along that Norotan Heights area at all?
There's some locations in town that you wonder whether the crossing guard is still worth having. In my career here, we've never eliminated a crossing guard position. And to be frank with you, I don't know what criteria needs to be met to do that. As soon as you take a crossing guard away from a location that doesn't typically have pedestrian traffic, and the next day someone gets struck by a vehicle, someone's responsible for that. So from a professional standpoint, I think a study would actually contribute more towards making that final decision whether a crossing guard is needed for eight days observing an intersection over a period of a month, it's kind of tough for me to give an accurate position.
And again, to be clear, I think putting in those crossing guards, our consultant can make a recommendation, but is the town and the police commission really have the ultimate authority in doing that. And so that kind of conversation can continue and be an open dialogue. But if everyone comes up and tells us they want a crossing guard, we will pass that information along. We just don't have the ability to do it.
Any other questions?
To put things into perspective, if I had to give you a yes or no answer, I'd say put a crossing guard at every single intersection in town. That's what I'd have to tell you.
Mr. Maroney.
Again, thank you for being here and sitting through our meeting. Just as a point, you referenced that there have been 3 pedestrian accidents in the Rowton corridor, and you said that that's low for that area. I think, and maybe this is something that is not part of this report, so if you don't have the answer, that's okay, are there other areas, you mentioned the post road, but that's not within walking distance of the high school. Are there other areas within the 2-mile radius of the high school that are as dangerous, more dangerous? I mean, because I think this is one of our dilemmas, is that we're hearing from parents that this area is dangerous, but we don't know that there's not other areas that are not, or more dangerous, less dangerous than that same area. And I think it's very difficult to know this information and to provide a bus for one area of town when we're not providing another for another area of town, which may in fact be more dangerous than this. So do we have any inclination on our 2-mile radius of other areas which there are more pedestrian accidents than the 3 that have been noted in the last 3 years here?
Off the top of my head, I couldn't give you that answer. I apologize.
No, it's okay. I realize it's out of scope. So
trying to visualize even the 2-mile radius versus where our higher traffic areas are, I'd have to do a little bit more research on that. But I'd be happy to.
Mrs. McCann.
One of the things that you include in the report, which I'm grateful to you for including, is the notion of distracted driving, but also pedestrians with earbuds in their ears. That's something that, you know, historically wasn't the case, but this is a change to circumstances that is a modern reality, and I think that we all do well to bear that in mind, that kids who are walking aren't listening the way, and we do have a lot more distracted drivers. I appreciate it says in here you're diligent about that, and I certainly believe it, but it is a reality that we can consider as we have this conversation.
Any other comments or questions? Yeah. Mrs. McCammon.
If the focus is on construction as the reason for putting a bus, Middlesex would not be impacted? They would not also need a bus?
Middlesex?
Middle
School.
School.
The kids walking to the middle school.
No, the kids get the bus because they have a different distance, so it really doesn't apply to them.
Okay, so but the area of construction?
No, because they're getting the bus.
Okay.
But does that, I think does that apply to all areas, not just that one area that's now getting a bus, but does that apply to people who live on West Avenue that have to walk by the construction zone? So to me, that would be the same impact, right? So I would assume that those people are within walking distance and they have to walk along the construction site to get to their middle school.
My understanding of the distance of the kids who are in that area, it's not really applying to those children, that they will actually have a bus to the school.
They will have a bus?
Yes. Okay. Just for the bus numbers, just to give you, I think at the last meeting I said like 25, okay? I wasn't too far off in factual being 29 in the sense of the catchment area we were looking at was about 49 students, and when you do, we basically overbook, right? And the percentage of kids don't show up for that. So based on the percentage we generally use, it was going to be about 29. When we look at the other children in that area and what the worst possible scenario would be.
Or the most.
Or the
possible.
most, sorry. Thank you for clarification. It would result in about 48 students being served. We actually book it at 118% over. The rest of the routes right now are booked at 120% over. So we would anticipate 48 students, and on a worst scenario, we'd probably have a full bus. Best scenario, have a full bus.
Just as a follow-up, do you have the route information, kind of what area that's served?
Yeah, we do, yeah.
And can you share what that would be, again?
Yes, I have the details here, but I could share, I mean, do you mean like right now, share?
Yeah, well, when we do an action item, that we would see that.
Yeah, it's
to the left and right of Noroton, basically those catchment areas.
Any other board questions? Any other comments?
So I guess I'm wondering what the action items are now going forward.
So
you have a recommendation for us for next year's budget, which was not included in next year's budget. So what are you going to be looking for?
So it's a wee bit like a superintendent recommending something like a transfer, and I have the right, like I have the right to do it. Forget about transportation, I have the right to do it, but it's kind of like silly to do it if you know the whole board's not going to support the transfer when it comes like 2 months later. This is going to come months later, right? So I just want people's tacit understanding. Look, I think this is in the best interest of the district at large, right? And once a transfer eventually comes, that you're understanding of that.
So I think to your immediate question, John, the decision of whether to move up the consultancy, if the board is interested in that, we can take a sense of the meeting of that, would be on for next meeting, right? Because we have a
Yes.
meeting cycle to discuss and then an action. As it is with the bus, is there's actually no action currently for the board until the superintendent brings a transfer. He can't bring a transfer until we have an approved budget. We can always reconcile our budget up until late June, July.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
July
Yeah.
1st. So it wouldn't, that issue now wouldn't be resolved until then. But the consultancy, if the board, that's an issue they'd like to see come back, and it's probably best if we take a sense of the meeting so I know it to be on the agenda, could come back next meeting. So with that, I'm just going to take a quick sense if moving up this this transportation consulting is something we'd like to do in this year. Mr. Maroney.
For me, I see no downside in starting it earlier than not, so I would propose to move it up.
Mr. Deneen.
I'm fine with moving it up. I'm not fine with the scope of it.
Okay. Mrs. Ritchie.
I'm fine with moving it up.
Mr. Brown.
I'm fine with moving it up. I'm just a little bit of a question in terms of what the ultimate deliverables are for this board. Are we looking at a full-blown, trying to get to a full-blown policy within the constraints we have from state of Connecticut in terms of transport? What our policy is as a board, or are we looking to make an appropriation, which technically, given the freedom that we've given to the administration, we don't actually need to approve? So I'd like a little more definition as to what question we're attempting to answer here as we move through this.
So I think specifically we'd be looking, and maybe part of what you're saying is what Mr. Deneen is talking about, like what's the scope of the study, but specifically would we move up having a transportation consultant come in?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of getting more information, exploring this, I think is great, and I think we should expedite that. I think the ultimate deliverable, what we're going to be asked to vote and decide upon, to me is a little in question. I'm not quite sure what the outcome is we're looking for. So I'd like to have some idea, perhaps a sense from the administration, or perhaps a sense from the Rules Committee, what we're actually looking to have as an outcome of this process.
Mr. Burke.
Go.
Mrs. McCannon.
I also agree with moving forward on the sooner side. I do agree that we need to take one more look at the scope of the document and make sure that we're all in agreement.
Mrs. Stein.
I would defer to the superintendent on timing, and I don't want to rush it if it means we're not getting the best consultant.
Mr. Sini.
Move it up, please.
Okay, to Mr. Maroney's question, the only thing I can see as a downside for the board, and that doesn't need to preclude what we're doing, is as I look at the financials and I look at our current balance, it's another shift of $25,000. And what I would ask for Mr. Rudel is a projection out. I'd like to make sure we stay in the black by the end of the year. We've made a lot of transfers. So this is actually, 25,000 is relatively small within our budget. Don't take that the wrong way, but I don't want to end up in the red. So as you continue to project out, I think maybe even if you see if there's anything big, if there's anything still encumbered, if there's anything we should worry about before we make this decision, just alert us as best you can.
And we did touch on that in Finance Committee, and I will certainly make sure that we touch on that every time we meet.
Yep, sure. I think if it's to be funded, we did flag salary savings from a vacant secretarial position, so we would likely recommend using those funds.
Okay. All right, so I think this will be back. Mr. Sini.
Just one follow-up to Dr. Adley. He said something about, I don't know what it would be like to go to the Board of Finance. Did I hear that correctly earlier?
Yeah, I was just playing out if I didn't get a bus, right, and you were doing the actual study and you wanted to wrap that up, before the start of the school, you'd have to go back for an appropriation, right? And I just don't think it's necessary.
I don't think there's enough time, probably.
Yeah.
Right.
But along those lines, there is a remedy if we don't have the funds within our current year budget. We could ultimately go to the Board of Finance.
There is, but I would hope that we could find the 25,000, and I hope before we actually vote to transfer, if there are any big red flags, we just know about it. Okay, so that item will come back. Thank you, Captain Marin. I know it was exciting for you.
Captain, thank you very much.
And please thank the chief for his work on this in the department. All right, do I have Slam here yet?
So
He's walking in, so everyone stretch.
They just finished at planning and zoning, so she's on her way over.
Can we take an action item and do the PAR?
Do you want to do the rest?
Mike, do you think she's walking in or walking out of P&Z? Oh, perfect. So they're walking in. So before we go through and make Deb's notes, crazy.
They're walking in here.
Yeah. A lull in the excitement. There's Amy. We're gonna take a 5-minute recess, maybe let Amy take off her coat. Yeah. Yeah, of course. Guys, I'm going to call this recess to an end. And welcome Amy, hot off of P&Z. Thank you. This is an update on the Oxridge Building Committee presentation. As a reminder, we delivered ed specs to the town committee. The town committee engaged SLAM. They have worked to put together all this work. The meetings have been long and informative, and they are here to kind of give us an update on where they are. So I will hand it over. Is Kip coming tonight?
Kip is still at the planning and zoning meeting.
Oh, he's still working? Okay, so I will hand it over to you, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. As Tara mentioned, we've been working with the building committee since the spring of last year, I believe. And so we are currently about 3/4 of the way through the design development phase, which is the second of 3 design phases that we go through. Schematic design and pre-design took place last year, completed in about December, and then we had the go-ahead to move forward with design development. In those early programming sessions, we spent time with the building committee developing the goals for the project. What we did is we took the ed spec that you delivered, and we worked with the administration and with the committee, and we took a list of probably 10 items and combined some and massaged them, and we have real 4 defining goals that we're pushing forward as we move ahead in design. Creating a vibrant and inviting building to gather students, families, and the Darien community, while implementing security and design measures to zone the building and campus for each use. And you'll see some of that in action as we move through the presentation. Creating a system of dynamic learning environments that engages each learning type and can transform as teaching tools and methodologies evolve. Having a building that's flexible and can grow with your curriculum and pedagogies as things change. That's really the goal. We want to make sure that this is a building that will stand the test of time. Provide a campus and facility that incorporates sustainable measures that meet or exceed the Connecticut high performance standards. We're pushing forward, near net zero goals, and for SLAM, that's a part of our everyday process, but it's something that, in this case, we're so happy to have a community that's also interested in creating a sustainable building for the future. Develop environments that support active learning, incorporating technology, movement, flexibility, and capacity for the projected enrollment. And we're listing 578, which is the total of ELP for that building and elementary students.
Amy, before you continue, I just want to acknowledge Katie Leblin's here, Diane Boston, and they've been instrumental on this committee, as is Duke Dean. Did I miss anyone else from the building committee? Mike's back there, and Dr. Forshoff, and they've all been hard at work. So.
That's right, and probably helped to develop those goals. We check in on those goals at the end of all the design phases so that we make sure that we're meeting them. And then here is just a reminder of the Oxridge Code, which we're also keeping in mind as we develop the school. The existing site plan, as you can see, the building, you probably are aware, steps down the hillside. North is up in this plan, so from east to west, the building drops in elevation as it steps down the hill. And we'll be working with that topography as we move forward with the new building as well. Since the school will remain in place and operational during construction, we looked at a number of different ways to phase the construction and to make sure that the existing school can stay running. And what we've found is that the most logical place to build is on the existing green space in the south portion of the front of the property. That's not quite enough land for all of the building program, and so you'll see that our building is going to wrap around the corner as well. And so a small portion of the existing building will have to be demolished over the summer to allow for the building to be built starting next fall. So the building is sited in such a way that it takes advantage of the existing topography, and the slope of the site runs, you can't see this, but from west to east, from east to west it goes down in slope, and the same thing happens at this upper portion in the south area where we're building the classroom wing. And so the main building is on one story, and then the back of the building, which is on the west and southern portion of this U-shaped or courtyard building that surrounds the courtyard, those are 2 stories, with the second story actually below the first. It has a complete daylight and the same windows as the upper level because of the way the hillside steps down, but it allows the building to remain relatively small in scale. It doesn't feel like a tall towering building, even though we are able to accommodate 2 stories. So the floor plan, here we have it color coded where the academics are in this yellowish gold color, and you'll see that the building is very well zoned so that the assembly wing houses most of the assembly spaces, so gymnasium, cafeteria, music rooms, and we'll be testing a location for the library here, and the art room and world language and OTPT will also be able to have access from this main lobby. The main entry of the building is at this level. Light blue is the administrative functions and the school nurse. So you'll see that they're all also located convenient to the entry and in a location for security and good eyes on the building. The ELP wing is located entirely in this western portion of the building. It's a 1-story wing. We'll be providing 9 ELP classrooms, a common room, and potential for a 10th build out. But there's the ELP's administration and all of its classrooms are on that one section separate from the rest of the building. It allows the students from ELP to have a private exit and for pickup and drop off. And the elementary school students will wrap around the courtyard, and their academic classes will be in groups of 4, each grade level having what we are calling a linear pod, so that kindergarten, 1st, and 2nd grade will all be on the main level, which is the same level as the main entry. And there's a grand stair in the lobby that will take you down to this level, which is 3rd, 4th, and 5th grades. And each of those spaces are served by appropriate restrooms and special ed spaces and storage rooms and the like, so that each space has its own, has plenty of, each floor has plenty of storage and access to all of the resources needed. And then I mentioned that the assembly wing is up on the main level as well. And what we like about that is that you can lock the doors to the academic wings, and the assembly wing can be made available for evening functions or times when the community might want to have access to the building. And so I'm going to run through a series of renderings that show the current design. So relatively traditional materials using brick and some cast stone. But what we've done is, I think, a modern interpretation of those materials and a building that will stand the test of time. This is from the approach and headed toward the building. The main entry is what you'll be faced with at the parent drop-off. And that's going to be an all-glass space that will be lit from within. So in the evening, if you were to approach the building, even without any lighted signage, the words Oxridge will actually glow from behind because the lobby itself will be lit. And that's intentionally a higher volume to stand out and signify the main entry, using Darien blue as well in the entry. Moving around the building, there's a lower parking lot. It's, the entrance to the gymnasium is about 6 feet lower than the main entrance. And that also helps to keep the scale of the building appropriate to the neighborhood and appropriate to the students who will be served by the building. But the gymnasium is a large volume, and so we've taken a look at ways to break up that volume and to make it more comfortable in scale. One of those ways is to use a brick pattern that will allow the brick to go from darker at the base to lighter at the top. We're still using the same traditional materials of brick, but allowing them to kind of ombre up the building, so to speak. But this main entrance, and I'm going to go back, is where the bus drop-off will be. So this is at the assembly wing, but it's also a wonderful place to collect the students. And after bus drop-off and some playtime, they'll come back to this door, and that's also where they'll be dismissed. Moving around the building, it's nicely situated so that there's some deeded open space, and I think you're aware of where it's situated. So there's wooded property behind. So this is an image as if I were standing in the woods looking back at the building. Not many will actually have this view. Just kind of have to stand back. But it allows you to see that the classroom wing, the 2-story volume of the classroom wing is actually, you know, down from the main level. So you can see in this image as we move around the building, yet again, that's the southern classroom pod, where 2nd grade is on the upper level and 5th grade on the lower level, but just as much daylight to the lower level as there is to the upper. And the building height is maintained at the 1-story level from the street. So moving around the building, this is the ELP wing, and again, 1-story volume, comfortable for those little students, but also for the neighborhood. And now we've moved back around, all the way around the building, and we're back at the main entrance, but this is the area where there might be parking spaces for, specific to the ELP community, and their pickup will occur over here. Entrance. So if anyone, do you have any questions? I'm happy to take questions as we move through, but.
Anyone have questions yet on the sites?
Okay.
Mrs. McCann.
I do specific to that ELP drop-off.
Sure.
It looks like DLC can also be accessed from there. I'm sure you did have this conversation, but you have a higher percentage of students with disabilities, and you've thought about that traffic flow and how it will work.
Yes. So the main level, and actually, oh, I pressed something. Maybe someone can help me. Oh,
what are we going to do when you're gone?
Okay.
No one else fix this.
Thank you.
Try now.
Okay. So, I don't want to blind anyone with the red dot, but at the main entrance, this is all on-grade access, and so we anticipate that there will be 4 parent drop-off spaces marked as is the current practice at the school. And so in this area where you'd have parent drop-off, this is a generous location for any kind of handicap accessibility needs. And student drop-off for both ELP and all of the other students, if they come by car. And maybe Luke can speak to this, are vans coming to this entrance as well? And vans will come to this main entrance. So that's all on grade. And the exit for the ELP wing is also on grade and all paved walks. DLC population would come right in the main door. And there are DLC classrooms both at the corner here. I can go back to the floor plan, but accessed on the main level. And there's also an elevator in the building. And so if someone wanted to traverse to the lower level or enjoy the lower level of the courtyard, that's accessible as well.
So does this represent an improvement over what is done today, or is this the same as what is done today for that drop-off of that population?
It's an improvement that we made a clear distinction between the drop-off area for parents and cars and the bus loop area. One thing that, Amy, if you don't mind just kind of pointing out, the 62 space marker is a really clear, distinct zone for buses, so it even further separates that, which is a huge improvement in terms of what we have currently, but just making sure that particularly special education transportation or vans are really clear distinction.
There's another entrance, a separate entrance for ELP on the side, and what do you envision that being used for?
That's actually for dismissal.
Okay.
So parent drop-off will occur here, and this at the main entrance. I'm sorry, I should point up there.
That's okay.
And students will be ushered into the school with their teachers in this direction. At the end of the day, they'll gather in the common room, which is located right here in the plan, from classrooms on either side, and parent drop-off occurs by parents have to park and then sign their children out, so they'll come into this door.
And what about the children that require busing?
If they require van busing, then they would be at this same
we would go back to the main entrance.
Sure. But this actually gives me a good time to looking at the site plan. One of the features of this school is that it does have an enclosed courtyard, a protected space. We're not seeing that as play space, but we're seeing that as teaching space. And so programs can be run in that area. There will be an outdoor classroom, and that will be directly associated or with a door to the art room and also to the elevator lobby. So someone, next slide. Imagine this turned, okay. And the main lobby is now to the left in the image. And there's access here at the upper level and a flat sidewalk across to the common room at the ELP. There's a small amphitheater style space, and that allows you to traverse the floor-to-floor height of upper level to lower level, but there's also a more sloped walk that brings you to a small reading nook or small gathering space. So there's an area for quite a large group to gather at the amphitheater area and have a presentation. And then there's a small classroom area to the left on the lower level of the courtyard where a class could have an outdoor classroom. And that's represented here, and you can kind of understand that the upper level is at +14 from the lower level, and the courtyard is the same way, so that there are two distinct levels, but a nice kind of connection between the two. This connection is also evident as we look at a cross-section of the building in the upper corner, that you can actually kind of see across to the open space from the commons area of the ALP straight through the building to the woods beyond. And this gives you an idea of the scale of that courtyard. an image inside that outdoor classroom space and at the amphitheater, and from the ELP side looking down. So the other portion of this presentation is during the important 2 school years and year and a half or so of construction of the building. And during that time, it's going to be really important to keep contractors and students separate, but also to just maintain the school and allow it to function and to be the very successful school that it is. So we're going to be very careful about demarking between construction and existing building. And as we move forward, you'll get more information about that from the construction management team, ONG and AP, and they'll be able to present a site logistics map that will allow you to see how the 2 separate functions can work on this property. But in the short term, what we're looking at doing is abating and demolishing 2 wings on the southern portion of the upper 2 levels of the existing school. And by adding 1 large size portable unit and by moving around some of the other spaces inside the building, we're able to maintain all of the existing program areas. Also, the district is being very helpful and taking the 2 ELP classrooms that exist today at Oxridge, and they'll take place at Tokenique, I believe. They'll be off-site during the duration of construction. So that's also very helpful in allowing the school to run. During the construction, there will be a very close proximity to the existing building. And so, as I mentioned, fencing, maintaining egress from the existing building, and separation of contractors from students is going to be given the most importance.
So we went through a little bit of that at the high school, and we certainly don't need to do it tonight, but just if you can assure the board that the district, the building committee will all have that conversation and that protocol worked out. I think during the cafeteria we had to rejigger it a little bit, so if you can just assure us that best practices are in, students and workers are kept apart, and the best safety practices are maintained.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that Dave Cravanzola from ONG would be the best person to discuss that with you, but my own kids are in a school right now that's under renovation, so I understand, and it's of the utmost concern
So
for
our
all
next
of us.
meeting to discuss that is this Thursday.
Okay, great.
Okay.
We worked it out, so and I
Great.
just want to make sure
Yeah.
we had 2 competing practices. If we just have one, it'd be great.
So we'll be sure that that's all spelled out, and I think that you'll also have a say in the security protocols and selection of the contractors when the time comes. And so this really ends the formal presentation, and I'm happy to take comments, questions.
Great. Is that your scratch or question?
That was,
It
since I have the focus.
Mr. Brown.
I just would like to say, you had me at the bus loop. I love the separation as an Oxridge parent. That's phenomenal. But just follow up to Ms. McCammon's point, and so Ms. Ritchie said with the ELP wing and the separation there, I'm just curious if we have that drop off in the 4 spots, but then we're also going to have some of the busing for perhaps ELP. I'm just not sure why we don't use some of that other entryway and have some division there, because the division here is beautiful. I mean, I'm sure you know. So this is terrific.
Part of the nice thing about the programmatic differences is that ELP has a different drop-off pickup time frame.
Okay.
So they can still use that as a distinct pickup and drop-off area for ELP students and families. They have a different time students are arriving in an abbreviated day, so they're exiting the building earlier.
So we don't have a separation by space, we have it by time. Okay.
Any other questions? Mrs. McCammon.
I love your 4 goals. Very exciting
Oh, good.
at the beginning. Can you, particularly goal number 2 and goal number 4, the system of dynamic learning environments that engages each learner type, and 4, environments that support active learning, can you just take just a few minutes, not a lot, but so that we can understand how your design is informed by these goals?
Sure. And I intentionally did not bring any interior design slides, but we can do that at the next time. But in the classrooms, in particular, we'll provide a lot of flexibility, and a lot of that will be done with furnishings, so that students have a choice of seating, height of tables, and that the teacher will have pure flexibility in how they can arrange all of that. There will be a teaching wall with today's latest technology, at the time actually, so 2 years ahead now, technology for 2022. And so we'll be planning for that. We've met with Jeff Adams once, and our IT consultant is working with him to make sure that we're also providing enough Wi-Fi access and the appropriate data closets to support the needs of technology as time moves on as well. Let me review my notes. Oh, so dynamic learning environments. One of the main things in the classroom pods that I did neglect to point out, and I might go back to the plan, is the learning commons outside of the classrooms. So we look forward to providing a space for breakout for the students. It could be quiet learning for some individuals if they have that privilege. It could be for a teacher to take a handful of students and have a reading group. Or it could be for 2 students to come together and make a poster. But what we'll have is the lockers outside of the classroom are going to define a space. Can I go back to slide sorter mode?
So you're talking about the learning commons in the hallways?
In the hallways, that's right. So each pod, thanks. Oh, well, I can just keep going back, right?
I mean, yep.
Yeah, come around.
So each pod of 4 classrooms has a U shape of lockers that defines a zone outside of the classrooms, but also separates the pod from the main corridor where others might be passing. And it allows us to provide some flexible furnishings, and we'll be discussing with Dr. Forshot and his team some more opportunities, but the library media specialist might be able to bring some books to that area that inform or contribute to whatever subject is going on in that grade level. There will be presentation areas and marker boards in there, and there will also be soft seating and counter spaces and areas for students to work together. And so that'll happen in all 6 areas outside of each of the grade levels.
Mr. Brown, we're going to let Amy get back to her seat, and then you're up.
So just a quick question, which came to mind given some of the construction on Heights Road, but I know we've been good neighbors in terms of keeping the sight lines down. In terms of runoff with the slope and everything there, I'm sure we've taken that into consideration. I saw the rain garden, which looked interesting, but I'm sure we've thought about runoff and things like that for our neighbors here.
That's right, and so we were just presenting to the Planning and Zoning for an hour this evening. We've already worked with the EPC and presented to them. There are 2 small zones of wetlands in the western portion of the site. And all of the grade essentially goes to that area. We are going to have some stormwater detention underground, under the play field that you see in this image, and that'll store the runoff that's coming from the site underground, and it will slowly release it through a series of pipes out back into the same wetlands where it currently runs. But we'll have the appropriately sized piping and splash guard areas so that it doesn't disrupt the conditions.
Mr. Sini.
It might be too early for this question, but was anything materially raised about the design functions or the site plan this evening? I know it was an informal.
There was a lot of concern about parking and traffic on Mansfield Avenue.
So I guess we go into my question on parent nights. There's overflow parking. Did that come up? I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Can you access a new open space playfield for?
Everyone wants to park on that.
Everyone wants to. I know. We'll look into that. I mean, it's a steep slope right now to go from. We're grading that to be actually more flat than it currently is. And so that means that there's more of a steep slope to get back up to the parking lot level. But the parking today will have 120 lined spaces and then an area for approximately 40 additional cars that can park where you see the word bus drop off on the far left, for example, and up around, and where you see parent drop off, because that won't be used for parent drop off.
What's the capacity today, Amy?
Today you have 91 lined spaces, and in this new plan you'll have 120 lined spaces with 40 more. There is overflow today, which I don't have a count for, but that they requested at the last meeting, so we'll look into it.
I think the police are very keen on this question as well, for the parking. I know in the past, and this is just a mechanics question, which I'm sure you all have looked at, but if you can help assure us, this is a sewer ejection system currently, and at times it's been problematic. So I assume we have all the right mechanics.
So
yes.
It'll all be new.
Yep.
But it will connect to the same city line.
Yeah. Okay.
But
so we're all sure that everything's going to work the right way. So Luke and I don't get the call. We try to get it. And now Dr. Adley will get it too.
That would be an epic fail on the part of the.
Okay.
Power outages will also be taken care of, and I know we've talked with Mike about trying to reuse the existing generator, but in fact, we're going to have a new generator on the site.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the committee, Duke,
thank you.
Diane, Katie, Mike, Luke. Who else is here that I'm missing? But thank you for all your hard work. And thank you. I know it's been a very long night.
They've been
Thank you.
terrific.
That's okay.
Amy and her colleagues have been terrific to work with and responses.
Thank you.
Amy. Thank you very much.
So action items. We'll move on to the personnel items. Mrs. Sion.
So we did find a psychologist for ELP.
Okay.
Starting at sometime in April.
Okay. So with that, can we approve the PAR dated February 25th, 2020? May I have a motion to approve? Mr. Burke, seconded Mr. Maroney. All in favor? That is unanimous. And is there any public comment this evening? Seeing none, can I entertain a motion to adjourn? Mr. Sini and Mr. Burke, all in favor? And that too is unanimous. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. We are adjourned. Okay.